So far, Donald Trump's attempts at peace have resulted in a Russia-US ice hockey game being planned. That is the net result of his efforts so far. He was inaugurated back in January, and he had promised to resolve the Russo-Ukrainian war in one day when he was on the campaign trail. However, reality is starting to hit him flat in the face, and finding a way to just get a cessation of hostilities in any form has so far proved elusive. So what are the underlying reasons for the lack of any sort of ceasefire, and is compromise possible between the two sides? Привit, my name is Connor Klein, and welcome to Geopolitics with Connor Klein. We are going to discuss the happenings of the Russo-Ukrainian war here. So Donald Trump had this second call, at least officially, with Vladimir Putin a few days ago. And during that call, Putin gave an undertaking to stop targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Within about 90 minutes of him making that promise on the call, Russia was blowing up energy infrastructure in Ukraine. So they took out the energy in the town of Slovyansk, near to the line of contact in the east of Ukraine. And Ukraine, in the meantime, started to strike Russian oil refineries in Krasnodar. So clearly, this cessation of targeting, it's not even a ceasefire, just targeting of energy infrastructure, which Ukraine had offered a couple of weeks ago and then offered a full ceasefire. Clearly, there is no goodwill from the sides to actually implement that, and in particular Russia, since they broke it within an hour and a half of agreeing to it. A full cessation of hostilities, Vladimir Putin basically, in exchange for his demanded that Ukraine would be effectively demilitarized, they wouldn't be able to get more materiel from its allies, wouldn't be able to mobilize, and presumably Russia on the other side would just continue to build up their army with a view to restarting hostilities in a stronger position. And the underlying reasons for the conflict, namely that Russia doesn't want to see Ukraine leave its sphere of influence. It doesn't want Ukraine to be independent of Moscow. This is for many reasons. One is the ambition to restore its former imperial borders. Also, there's a fear of Russia losing, the current Russian regime losing power if there was a very successful democratic, fully integrated into the European Union Ukraine on its doorstep. It would be like a domino effect. And Ukraine obviously rejects that. It wants to be independent. It became an independent country in 1991. It wants to join the European Union for the economic benefits, just like Poland and the three Baltic states, Poland being its neighbor, and it has had fantastic economic growth and development, unlike the countries that stayed in Russia's sphere of influence, like Ukraine, Belarus, etc. So those are the underlying reasons for the conflict. War is the continuation of politics by other means. Russia was unable to keep control of Kyiv through diplomacy or a little bit of skullduggery. And since that has failed, they launched the invasion of Crimea and Donbass in 2014, and then obviously the more extended invasion in 2022, when they were not able to take back control of Kyiv. And Vladimir Putin is very clear that he wants the underlying reasons for this conflict resolved before he'll agree to a ceasefire. Going back to, it was a couple of days before the February 24, 2022 invasion, he demanded denazification, which is basically regime change in Kyiv, and having a pro-Moscow president in Ukraine, demilitarization, so that Ukraine wouldn't be able to defend itself from any future Russian aggression or Russian military pressure. And he is repeating those demands again in exchange for cessation of hostilities. So basically, he wants to win the war. He wants a Ukrainian capitulation before he'll even agree to a ceasefire. And it seemed that he just told Donald Trump that he would agree to not targeting energy infrastructure, even though that actually would seem to be slightly in Russia's favor to agree to that. But anyways, Putin agreed to that on the call with Trump, possibly just to give Donald Trump something to boast about on social media, that he had achieved something, when in reality, they obviously broke it straight away. and it has had no effect. Ukraine, on the other hand, because of their partial dependence on US military support and financial support, they have been a lot more agreeable with Donald Trump's constant requests for concessions. Donald Trump, I know it's sounding a little bit hackneyed at this stage, the art of the deal is apparently to give away all your chips before you can get to the negotiation table, or give away the bargaining chips that you are holding on behalf of someone else, like Ukraine. He said no NATO membership, basically no security guarantees, and that Ukraine has to give up its territory, basically making concession after concession. Ukraine has, under extreme pressure of the US cutting off intel and military support, and that was followed by a rapid Russian advance in the Kursk Oblast, that tiny piece of Russia that Ukraine had been controlling, and now it's almost trivial what they control inside of Russia. That is what Donald Trump's pressure led to, so they have started with an offer of agreeing to a cessation of hostilities on energy infrastructure, and then extended that to a cessation of hostilities with a few caveats like returning the abducted children that Russia has kidnapped, and also POW swaps. That actually has been achieved. We saw the prisoner of war swap. It's like 175, 175. These happen periodically during the war, so probably that was going to happen anyways. Not really an achievement from the call of Donald Trump, but it was announced on that call by the Russians, not even by Donald Trump. He didn't mention it at all. So basically, the Ukrainians have been giving these offers for peace. All Vladimir Putin has done is basically increased his demands, and the further that Donald Trump placates Vladimir Putin and the Russians, the more they demand, and that pushes the negotiation position that he's proposing further and further away from what Ukraine can accept. So this negotiation style by Donald Trump, which is basically trying to force Ukraine to capitulate at this point, has been completely unsuccessful because Vladimir Putin wants to win. He is also against any sort of force that would patrol the two sides, if there is a cessation of hostilities, actually having any teeth or being credible as a deterrence to Russia. So until that changes, unless Donald Trump does a complete 180 from what he's done the last 2 months and suddenly realizes that the only way to get Russia and Vladimir Putin to compromise is actually by raising the costs of them not doing so, i.e. supporting Ukraine militarily and financially and committing for Ukraine to be in a way stronger position. This is what Volodymyr Zelenskyy said back to Donald Trump before the election, to strengthen the negotiation position of Ukraine that would help Ukraine then negotiate some sort of peace agreement that would, at the very least, preserve Ukraine's independence from Moscow and presumably give a perspective for Ukraine to regain all its territories in the future at some point, maybe even diplomatically. So at this juncture, the chances of compromise and a ceasefire look close to zero unless Donald Trump completely changes his negotiation style and actually ramps up the pressure on Moscow, as opposed to just trying to bully and pressure Volodymyr Zelenskyy to make more concessions, because at the end of the day, he is not going to be able to deliver what Putin wants, which is the capitulation of the country, which should make complete sense to everybody who's watching this. And you have to remember that on the battlefield, Russia has made very slow progress, and it's not clear that they're in a position to win this war militarily. Even if the US was to end all support to Ukraine, the war would presumably roll on for many more years before it would come to its conclusion. So I personally am not seeing much optimism about Donald Trump doing a 180 and actually supporting Ukraine. He has been constantly threatening countries like Canada, Denmark, and the part of Denmark that is Greenland, Mexico, Panama, and doesn't seem to be very thrilled about respecting the borders of those countries, constantly questioning them. So my unfortunate conclusion is that Donald Trump will continue to try and pressure Ukraine and make concessions to Vladimir Putin, at least in the short term. Hopefully, I turn out to be wrong on that, but that is the position that we find ourselves in. Regardless, Slava Ukraini, Horom Slava. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you are going to Ukraine, I have a guide that will obviously keep you as safe as possible. You would be going to a country that is involved in the biggest war in Europe since World War II. Have also a hospitality guide for going to the best places in cities like Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv, Uzhhorod, and Chernovtsi. So it's just down there in a link below this video. And I will see you in the next one. Do побачення and do перемоги.